We kick off the story with a kid named Lloyd being mercilessly kicked out of his group of adventurers. And it's like this, my dudes, you might be wondering how we got here. So, to explain that, let's go back in time. And there, we see little Lloyd, jaw dropped, while a woman conjures fire in the palm of her hand. She tells him to do the same, or else he'll go without dinner. And with that, the young man tries his best to meet her expectations until sometime later, he comes back to the same woman, mentioning that constant dripping wears away a stone. In other words, he managed to conjure fire in his hand. And when he actually manages to produce flames, his tutor offers a rare compliment. But before he can enjoy the moment, she puts out his fire and sends a spell dozens of times stronger, smoking the poor dude out. According to her, he still has a long way to go. What a caring teacher. The next day, Lloyd stomps the ground hard, trying to make a new technique work. When nothing happens, his instructor decides to show him how it's done and rubs her foot, making water appear. Then, the persistent Lloyd copies her and manages to dampen the dirt too. However, as soon as he's praised again, Miss Faith in the Crazy Ones immediately bombards the guy with water, showing him how real magic works. On another day, the little guy almost bursts a vein and his underwear trying to manipulate the wind. And the teacher? Well, she sends him flying with a single breath. Is it over? Calm down, there's more. Because when snow covers the land, Lloyd decides it's time to practice with this new element, and in a proud and innocent way, he shows his master a snowman he made that looks just like her. And not one to break tradition, she uses the very same snowman to grab him and drop him from a considerable height, after magically making the snowman enormous. After digging himself out from under the pile of snow, Lloyd realizes he needs more power and vows to work even harder. Then there's the day his master is way past tipsy, after a few too many bottles. Nursing a monstrous hangover, she hears her apprentice ask if she's okay. She admits she's not at all. Lloyd, undeterred, places a hand on her forehead and prepares a healing spell. Feeling a bit better, the woman admits the boy's gotten pretty good at healing and gives him a rare, affectionate hug, at which our little protag is proud to have helped her. But there's no time to celebrate, she's already recovered and ready to get back to magic training. With that, the days fly by, and the young mage's training never lets up. On a certain night, the teacher seems troubled as she stares at a book in a box, and our protag then comes by and says dinner is ready, and the woman accidentally drops the book. Lloyd picks it up to hand it back, but as he does, he's struck by a magical reaction that almost fries the kid's processor. Realizing what happened, his master sees that he has the potential to become a chosen one too, so if that's his destiny, she swears she won't let him make the same mistakes she did by becoming overconfident with his skills. At that, she kisses the boy's forehead, leaving a blue mark behind. The scene changes, and the next day the instructor explains that a white mage is someone who uses magic for the benefit of others. And while she's talking, Lloyd regenerates a piece of fruit and earns a compliment, but his master immediately goes further, regenerating the whole tree and bringing it back to life with her healing magic. And this demonstration makes our protag express that his master is incredible. That night, she tells Lloyd that, according to what she's heard, some beastmen can use rare magic to control monsters. And Lloyd's curiosity is piqued by a mention of ancient magic in the book on the table, but the teacher's expression darkens, and she says he doesn't need to learn that it's just a type of magic that's been extinct for centuries. The next day, Lloyd conjures a staff, but his teacher thinks he's way too slow, then conjuring her own scepter and tripping the poor boy, making him fall. She explains that he needs to speed up and reminds him that, as inexperienced as he is, he must never get complacent with his training. Later, the two sit at the table to continue studying, and while he reads about the Magistone, his teacher explains that it's a crystallization of mana powerful enough to turn nearby things into other Magistones. And then the scene changes, and a few more days have passed. They went to a certain forest, and after arriving, the master takes off Lloyd's blindfold. With a wild beast lurking, the woman hands a knife to her apprentice and gives him the lowdown. His mission is to get home in a week. Basically, a fantasy version of Naked and Afraid, using only magic to survive. The moment she leaves him, Lloyd is attacked by a giant wolf. He runs, not caring if he looks like a coward. After escaping up a tree, he realizes he can't yet defeat monsters with a white mage's spells, so all he can do is keep running until he's strong enough to fight back. Looking around, he sees just how far from home he really is. At night, he regenerates a fruit to eat and hides in a cave. Drawing a magic circle on the ground, the young mage plans to tweak the design to channel more power and improve his skills. With the sunrise comes more hardship, as he has to cross a mountain, and this won't be an easy task. Night after night, he practices his magic circle, and also works on improving his detection magic, or else he could end up starving. And by combining two circles, he hopes to boost his running speed. One morning during his adventure, Lloyd accidentally steps on a branch and draws the attention of a hideous spider. And once again he bolts. And it's at this moment that he tests his newly improved speed circle, which actually works, allowing him to escape unharmed. Running flat out, Lloyd finally makes it back home but passes out before he can even knock on the door. His master soon finds him and welcomes her apprentice back. Then a few more days passed, and while tidying up a room, Lloyd, now with a noticeably more mature voice, stumbled upon a book that caught his eye. The cover was a painting of a city, and at that moment his master appeared, telling him to get back to cleaning, but he still asked to borrow the book. The next day, while Lloyd was sweeping, his master called him to help with a spell that could stop the aging process. At another time, she interrupted him while he was hanging laundry, asking for help with a healing spell. And while they were grubbing, the mage revealed she'd thought up a new enhancement magic. In other words, more work on the horizon. That night, when our protag was already begging for a break from exhaustion, his master mentioned she cast a spell on him so he wouldn't sleep for a week. That way, he wouldn't need to rest and could keep working, then offering him another potion to recover his vitality. And I confess, I'd love to have one of those so I wouldn't have to sleep and could pump out more videos for you guys. And after a long struggle, the moment of glory arrives, where he finally managed to get a moment to look at the book. The scene changes, and the next morning his master went to wake her student for more experiments, but his room was empty. She saw the book with the city on the cover and realized the connection. Meanwhile, he was on his way through the forest, heading straight for the city he saw on that book's cover. And once inside the walls, the mage wandered the plaza, dumbfounded, as he'd never seen so many people together. A man carrying boxes rushed past and cursed at Lloyd for being in the way, but all Lloyd could think was how amazing cities seemed. He traded his last coin for a loaf of bread, but just as he was about to eat, a gust of wind slapped a piece of paper against his face, while the person responsible vanished as soon as he saw his plan succeed, leaving Lloyd to read a flyer about adventurer recruitment. Some time later, far from there, inside a shadowy dungeon, a group of warriors fought a cyclops, and our protagonist was among them, jaw dropped at the intensity of the brawl. The team's leader shouted for Sheena to cast a healing spell, while Lloyd slammed his staff to the ground and summoned a magic circle that spread across the whole battlefield. And with that, the whole team is now buffed and ready to finish the beast off. First, the archer fires an arrow straight into the monster's eye. The Cyclops retaliates with a punch, but the team's tank steps in, blocking the blow, surprised at how much lighter the impact felt. At this, the sorceress casts a binding spell, wrapping the monster's arms and legs, giving their leader the perfect chance to finish the job with a powerful sword strike. And after their victory, the tank stared intently at Lloyd. When the group returned to the city, the whole team was greeted with cheers for defeating the Cyclops, but Alan, the hero, was by far the most celebrated. Later, when it came time to split the mission rewards, Lloyd received a much smaller share than the others. At that moment, Alan explained that this was what a D-rank member got, and the mage didn't complain. And well, with that settled, the leader called for a toast, but Lloyd made it clear he wasn't much of a drinker and wandered away. The team's which grumbles about his attitude, while Alan comments that any white mage could have done Lloyd's job. After all, white mages are useless in battle and are just there for show. Nothing like the classic prejudice against the support class, a real shame. But even with these words worthy of a total doofus, the tank is still silent, observing our protagonist. Meanwhile, back at Lloyd's master's house, she was visited by a man named Will, the guy who threw the flyer at our protag, bringing the news that her apprentice had been recruited by the heroes. She was happy and says she owes him one now, since this way the boy would get real training, but she's still worried he might become overconfident. Will asked if her regrets still haunted her, making her uncomfortable, but she promised herself she wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past. Then Will recalled how, back then, the demon lord sacrificed himself trying to steal that grimoire, taking many others down with him. And at a crucial moment, Sybil's ancient magic brought everyone the demon lord killed back to life at the cost of her own. And dudes, either I'm crazy or the plot twist just hit hard, because at this moment the scene really suggested that this Sybil is actually our protagonist, who got younger and lost his memories. Damn, did anyone else get that, or is it just the narrator's excitement? Anyway, the scene changes, and at dawn, back in the city, a vendor was promoting a book about Alan's group's adventures. According to him, long ago in ancient times, this world was created by the creator, and legends said that the trials of the heroes were left behind, the national treasures of the sacred nation, the sacred swords, and one of the 4 heroes chosen by these swords was Alan. That's why all the monsters threatening the city had been defeated, and now, Alan's name echoed throughout the entire kingdom. Speaking of the city's great celebrity, Alan stumbled drunkenly into a room where the team's tank was reading a book. Worried because lately the blows to her shield had felt odd, Alan, unconcerned, said he felt stronger than ever. The girl pointed out that he hadn't been training much lately, and Alan just shrugged, figuring there was no need, since he was naturally much stronger than anyone else. Meanwhile, by a stream, 2 soldiers stood guard until they were slaughtered by a giant creature. The next day, Alan was informed that the border guards had been killed. The messenger explained that the area was also a route for smugglers, so it was urgent to protect the soldiers assigned there. And full of bravado, Alan insisted that taking down a few golems would be a piece of cake. Eager for action, he rallied his team and followed Lloyd, who used his search magic to guide them to a cave where Alan finished off a golem with a decisive strike. But then, an enemy sorcerer summoned a new golem, and Lloyd quickly noticed the sorcerer was a demon, as the black stone on his staff was a magistone. The tank assumes the mage is using that stone to control the golems, while Lloyd casts a magic circle to strengthen his allies. As soon as he's done, he tells the archer to shoot the mage. After that, the white mage orders the witch to hand over her staff, and as soon as she does, the enemy mage seals the scepter. Furious, Alan makes it clear who's really in charge, saying he's eager to end the fight. But Lloyd warns him that without the magistone controlling the golem, the creature's movements become completely unpredictable, making any battle extremely dangerous. Alan ignores the warning and charges straight at the giant, forcing Lloyd to rush over and push the leader out of harm's way just in time. Annoyed, Alan yells at the kid to get out of his way, and then delivers a sword strike that brings the stone creature crashing down. With the mission over, we return to the opening scene, where the party leader decides to kick Lloyd out, accusing Lloyd of always hiding behind the others and leaving all the healing to Sheena. In other words, Lloyd isn't just useless, he's also a burden to the team. And I'm just thinking that I can't wait to see this bastard's face when he realizes he's a total nobody without our protagonist by his side. Hanging his head, the outcast admits he still lacks strength, to which Alan just laughs and tells the white mage to get lost. 3 days later, Lloyd is searching for a new group. After another failed attempt, an archer tells him they already have a white mage on their team. With each rejection, Lloyd's frustration only grows, and his luck seems to have run out. Then, suddenly, he hears a girl shouting at the guild receptionist, demanding a white mage now. The moment the staff member points to Lloyd, the adventurer runs toward him as if she's just found a treasure chest and grabs him by the arm. And with our protag being basically kidnapped, the scene changes and we see our boy Lloyd wandering through the city, beating himself up for getting kicked out of his party by Alan. We get a kind of flashback where he remembers the guy's accusations, calling him a useless white mage, a dead weight who just hides behind the team and is good for almost nothing. The only thing he knows how to do is heal, but even Sheena, another party member, could do a better job. Lloyd, poor guy, still tries to argue, asking if Alan really thinks he lacks skill. The leader, a real jerk, doesn't even bother to answer, just tells him to think whatever he wants and get lost. But as he walks away, we notice that Sheena wasn't really on board with this. probably because she'd noticed that he had skills. She realized the group had changed and weird things started happening after Lloyd joined, like how the hits she was tanking suddenly felt a lot weaker. Anyway, Lloyd heads to the center of town and comes face to face with a statue that looks just like his master, which only makes him miss her even more. The scene then shifts, and now we're following what's probably our protagonist's new group, because that crazy pink-haired girl is there. We see they're getting ready to raid a bandit territory. The mission is A rank, so this is serious business. However, we see the redhead of the team is visibly upset about something, but she's not saying a word. With that, they launch their attack, catching the bandits completely by surprise. The mage of the team starts chanting a spell, and one of the bandits spots the opening, telling his buddies to attack only after she's finished. They charge forward, shielding themselves, and when she gets tired from chanting, they move in for the kill. But the party's archer is providing cover from a distance, and with a single shot, he puts the enemies on the floor. These guys' team seems pretty balanced. Even the swordswoman and leader of the group can handle herself just fine. And even when problems pop up, the team's tank protects her with his shield. The mage then uses her magic to give the tank a strength buff, and with that extra juice, he plows through the bandits, securing the win. The bandit boss panics, looking for an escape route, but before he can do anything, the pink-haired girl finds him and tells him to surrender without a fight. The boss, acting all tough, demands to know who she is and why they were attacked out of nowhere. That's when he notices the gold pendant on her neck, an emblem that means she's an S-rank adventurer. The bandit boss still doesn't give up. He's got one last card up his sleeve. He believes that even if they're all S-rank, they won't be able to beat what he's about to summon. Using his staff, he activates a summoning spell, and a giant golem rises from the ground. With that, the swordswoman, whose name is Yui, charges in first and brings her sword down on the golem with all her might, but the thing barely even gets a scratch. The redhead, whose name is Clum and who's been spacing out from the beginning, zones out again and doesn't hear Yui telling her to buff her strength. Yui literally has to scream to get her attention. When she finally snaps out of it, she casts the physical enhancement spell. With the buff, Yui's power increases like 5-fold, and she slices the golem in half with a single strike. They capture all the bandits, and Yui goes to talk to Clum about what happened. The redhead apologizes for being distracted and says she's no longer worthy of being called an adventurer. Yui understands Clum's situation, as apparently her worries are because of her sister, Sylvie. Yui asks how Sylvie is doing, but before Clum can answer, the scene cuts back to Lloyd, right at the moment he was being rejected by an archer and then got recruited by Yui. She was so hell-bent on finding a white mage that she didn't even bother to ask his rank and just started dragging the poor guy by the hand to her party's base. She introduces Lloyd to the team and officially welcomes him, even though he hasn't even agreed to join yet. Yui's comrades realize right away that she brought the guy here without explaining anything, which is totally her style. The archer, whose name is Cross, explains that they're in a hurry because they have an urgent quest, and without Clum, they can't do it. Nobody there thinks Lloyd is a good replacement, and Lloyd himself doesn't have the guts to prove otherwise, especially after finding out they're an S-rank party. And although he's already given up on himself, Yui hasn't, and she forces him to show his magic. Lloyd thinks he's just going to let them down, but he gives it a shot anyway. He summons a staff using storage magic, which is enough to make them realize maybe this guy is actually good. And then, without even chanting a single word, he buffs everyone's strength. Nobody feels the upgrade at first, but Yui decides to test it. With a simple flick of her sword, she cuts through a tree like it's butter, leaving everyone with their jaws on the floor. Lloyd explains that he didn't just use physical enhancement, he also layered several other spells that massively boosted Yui's power. Well, that seals the deal. The reality is, Clum isn't even close to Lloyd's level, but Lloyd himself seems to have no clue just how overpowered he really is. He explains that he used 5 different spells because he assumed that if he only used one for a team of skilled adventurers like them, it would be mediocre and they wouldn't like it. He just wanted to impress them. However, seeing their stunned faces, he thinks he messed up, that what he did was mediocre. The thing about being constantly put down is that it destroys your self-esteem, and our heroes, it seems, is in the basement. He assumes he didn't impress them and says he doesn't want to be a dead weight, so he turns to leave. But the party is so shocked by what they saw, they can't even speak. However, Yui quickly snaps out of it and screams at the top of her lungs for him to come back. He returns, at least to hear what they have to say, and tells them where he came from and how the heroes' party kicked him out for being useless. Yui is shocked that he even worked for the heroes' party, but he tells them not to be impressed, because he isn't that good. Man, that kid's self-esteem is in hell, guys. He advises them to go back to their old white mage because it's better for them. That's when they tell him the story about Clum. She's good and worked with them, but her sister, Sylvie, was sick. She used to be able to adventure and take care of her, but lately she was just too tired, and it was affecting her work. In the last fight, she got distracted and almost got the whole team wiped. And even though they were fine with her staying, she got so worried that she decided to quit. Normally, they can get by without a white mage, but for A-rank missions, it's mandatory. And besides being a great addition to the team, they saw her as a good friend. Lloyd sees they're genuinely worried and thinks about how lucky she is to have such loyal teammates, compared to the ones he had. He asks about Sylvie's illness and finds out she's turning into a magic stone. He remembers reading a book about it with his master and asked if the condition was reversible. She said yes. Seeing that he could help, he asks Yui to take him to Clum's house. When they get there, she opens the door and they start talking. She reveals that she and her sister were adventurers and one day, Sylvie got injured on a mission. Lloyd asks about the nature of the illness, and Clum takes them to Sylvie's room. When she opens the door, Lloyd feels an immense magical power coming from the room. Clum removes the blanket, revealing that Sylvie's legs and hands are already stone. She says that eventually her whole body will be like that. Lloyd says he thinks he can heal her, but Clum obviously doesn't believe him, since several advanced mages had already tried and failed. However, Lloyd asks if the injury happened in a cave, and Clum, shocked, says yes. He checks where the injury started and confirms that an invading magic power is causing the symptoms. Clum still has her doubts, but he says his master told him it could work. Yui also tells Clum to trust Lloyd, so she decides to let him give it a try. He summons his staff and casts a powerful spell that leaves him feeling weak. He explains that the spell will reverse the magic power overflowing in Sylvie's body. Afterwards, he immediately casts a healing spell. Clum, in awe, says that the healing power he's using isn't just any regular spell. He admits it's a different kind and consumes more magic power, but insists it's just an ordinary healing spell. Yui asks Clum what she thinks, and she can't help but admit that the magic is anything but ordinary. It's incredible that Lloyd is casting two different spells at the same time and still has the strength to sustain them both. Yui points out that Sylvie's body is returning to normal. Clum holds her sister's hand as she completely recovers. Everyone witnessing this genuine miracle is shocked and happy. Clum is beyond grateful but reveals she can't return to the team because once her sister recovers, they'll go on adventures together. She offers to buy them a round later as thanks and says she's sure the team is in good hands with Lloyd. He replies that he isn't a team member yet, and she's shocked that he still doubts himself. The scene changes and the party is out to dinner. Yui is telling the others about the crazy thing Lloyd did, but no matter how much she praises him, he still thinks he's not good enough. She tells him to stop being so modest. He apologizes to the team for not being able to get Clum to come back, but that's not their worry right now. They want to celebrate. As they talk about the future, Lloyd thinks about the heroes' party and how they made him feel compared to how he feels now. He asks if he can join them. They're shocked, since he had rejected them earlier, but they reveal they also want to work with him. And just like that, he officially joins the party. The next day, without wasting any time, the team gathers for a celebration, and Lloyd is moved by the feast his teammates have put together for him. And since he was absolutely starving, he didn't bother with ceremonies and dug into the grub with gusto, not turning down a single dish. He compliments the quality of the local food, but the others can't quite figure out why. After all, by the town standards, this restaurant was just SOSO. Still, savoring the dishes, Lloyd remembers that things weren't always like this when he was younger, back in the days when he trained with his master. Curious, his friends ask what he means. He explains that he had a tutor who taught him magic, and she used to cook with nothing but garden herbs and wild mushrooms. Meat was a rare treat. Now, everyone wants to know what kind of person his master was. Lloyd shares that she specialized in offensive magic and, in fact, it wasn't unusual for her to accidentally set off an explosion with her crazy experiments. Even so, she taught him a few support spells, since she was far more skilled than he was in every way. Excited by that description, Silica thinks about asking this mage for some tips herself one day, but Lloyd immediately warns her that doing so means putting your life on the line every single day. Cross figures she must have been pretty strict, but Lloyd admits she also had a gentle side, and that despite all her clumsiness and reckless ways, she had a kindness that really shone through. The subject then changes, and Yui asks them to start talking strategy. But first things first, everyone agrees the new guy needs to be brought up to speed on the mission details. And since Yui is a disaster at explaining things, she tries to pass the responsibility to Dagas, who points out that, technically, she's the team leader. But since she's dodging her duties, he'll take over. So, the shield bearer lays out the plan. The goal is to wipe out groups of monsters that have been destroying farms in the area. Apparently, it's not just one kind of creature behind the attacks, but all sorts of different races banding together, which is something adventurers have never seen before. Since they're up against so many enemies, Cross admits he and Yui will have a tough time, and the captain adds that in moments like these, they really rely on Silica's area spells. Even so, the mage points out she can't run out of mana during a crucial battle, so she'll need the others to help her save energy. That's when Yui asks if Lloyd can use offensive magic. He says yes, though his spells aren't as strong as his support magic. Dagas then assigns everyone's roles. He and Yui will draw the monster's attention first, giving Silica a chance to blast them all at once. At the same time, Cross will hang back to protect both her and Lloyd, who'll be providing support with buffs and healing. Silica confesses she's excited to see Lloyd's support magic in action, but he makes it clear they shouldn't expect anything too spectacular. And just because he said that, I'm already even more curious. But for the group, that statement was like raining on their parade. Yui even tells him he ought to have a little more confidence, but he reminds them he was kicked out of the hero squad for lack of skill. Cross, for his part, says he'd prefer someone who's genuinely humble like Lloyd over a bunch of arrogant jerks who look down on other people, and the team agrees with him, no reservations. Leaving the tavern, everyone promises to meet again at the inn the next morning. While the four veterans head off together, Lloyd goes his own way. Dagas asks where he's going, since the hotel is in the other direction. Lloyd, all sheepish, admits he doesn't have the money to pay for a room. So, the tanker tosses him a pouch of coins as an advance for the missions they'll be doing together. Showing immense gratitude for this sign of trust, Lloyd promises he'll earn every coin. That night, back in his room, Lloyd reflects on how kind everyone on this team is and resolves to work hard to repay their kindness. The next day, they all meet up and wait for Yui to come out of her house. She's got a backpack on, unlike the others, and asks why nobody else is carrying one. Cross explains that Lloyd used his storage magic for everyone, meaning he can magically carry all their gear. Yui gets all excited and hands her stuff over to the white mage, who uses his staff to stash it all, leaving the leader amazed that carrying heavy loads on the road will never be a problem again thanks to our protag. Lloyd even offers to teach the trick to the others, who had no idea they could learn it too. According to him, everyone is born with at least a little mana, so with some practice, anyone can do the same. Feeling much lighter for obvious reasons, the team heads out toward the farms in high spirits. Once they reach a certain area, Dagas points out that just past those mountains lies the Magocracy, the land of the demons. Right now, they're keeping a low profile, but he wonders when they'll make another move to conquer the continent, since that's always their goal. A little further on, the group comes across a bridge that was swaying so much it sent a shiver down their spines, because if you fell from there, there'd be nothing left to tell the tale. Trying to lighten the mood, Yui distracts everyone with a question. When you need to invent something on the spot to get through a tough time, what do you do with water? The others start tossing out answers. I boil it, I spill it, I freeze it, I toss it, I drink it, I pour it over my head. Seeing that Lloyd is completely lost in space, the captain tells him to join in with his own silly answer. He doesn't really get why they do it, saying he didn't learn this from his mentor. Cross then explains that the whole point is to say something goofy on purpose and laugh about being wrong. Our protagonist promises he'll take the attempt to answer something idiotic seriously, which Yui mentions won't be much fun if he takes it so seriously, since this is a game meant to chill everyone out. Being tense goes against the purpose. He asks why they do it, and she replies that even if the mission is challenging, staying tense will just wear you out and won't solve anything. She then asks another question. When you split a hunt, you divide it into equal parts, but what do you call someone who forges and divides a completely new path? The three most experienced teammates quickly chime in: trail cutter, trail splitter, and trail sharer. And Lloyd, who was last and almost blowing a fuse in his head to answer, just says, a broken trail. His friends cut him some slack, saying he's getting into the spirit of it, and our protagonist is happy to be welcomed. Meanwhile, deep in a forest, a hooded figure kneels in prayer before a black stone radiating chaotic energy. Back with the group, since they're not hauling heavy packs, they reach the campsite earlier than expected and waste no time setting up the tents and the fire. Yui asks if she can take a bath now, but Dagas reminds her they still need to gather firewood and look for food. Hearing that, Lloyd volunteers to get the wood, giving Yui the chance to drag Silica toward the water. A little while later, after picking up some branches, Lloyd figures he's found enough. As he's stowing the wood, he spots some fruits just like the ones his master once revived with magic, so he bites into one and decides to take a bunch back for the group. Suddenly, he hears a girl scream and rushes toward the sound. At the river, where Yui and Silica were bathing, a giant aquatic creature appears menacingly. Lloyd recognizes it instantly, a basilisk. With the advantage of being in the water, the serpent surges toward the girls, its speed making it impossible for them to escape. At the last second, Lloyd gets close enough to cast an offensive spell at the basilisk, drawing its attention and allowing the girls to swim to safety. He quickly pulls their weapons out of storage and tosses them over, then gives them a support spell. As the basilisk lunges at Lloyd, Yui darts forward and slices the beast in half. Even wounded, it refuses to go down without a fight. Seeing the battle isn't over, Silica conjures a fireball and incinerates the creature. She can't even believe the overwhelming power she just unleashed. Yui, in fact, is impressed with her teammate's performance, and her teammate, in turn, still hasn't processed the crazy thing that just happened. In any case, Yui thanks Lloyd for his help, since if it weren't for him, they'd surely have been barbecue. Anyway, she gives her sword to Lloyd for him to store, and fate decided to be cruel to the girl, because after that her towel fell, causing her to let out a huge scream of embarrassment. The scene then changes, and later, the team gathers to learn storage magic from Lloyd. We see that our protag has the girl's handprint tattooed on his face, as if it were his fault she lost her towel. Lloyd continues explaining the basics, mentioning that you just have to create an opening between your palms and put something inside. Honestly, nobody gets a damn thing, but they try anyway. Seeing they're not getting anywhere, Lloyd apologizes for not being a better teacher and for being so useless. Dagas tells him not to be so hard on himself. And seeing how understanding his friends are, Lloyd finally cracks a smile. At that moment, Silica gets the idea to say the word storage out loud, and like magic, it happens in her hands. And then they understand that since they're not like Lloyd, they just need to use chance. When night falls, the team's white mage sits by the fire while Yui keeps watch, noting there are no monsters around. Sensing her mood, Lloyd asks if something's wrong. She sits down and thanks him for joining the group. He says there's no need, he was in trouble and looking for work anyway. Even so, the captain feels like she forced him onto the team. Lloyd then asks why she's so focused on this mission, and she confides that it reminds her of her hometown. When Yui was a child, monsters attacked her village, and she was the only survivor. That's why she couldn't just turn a blind eye when she heard about monsters attacking farms. In the middle of her story, Lloyd tells her to be quiet and wake the others while he grabs his staff. Once everyone is up, the team hides among the trees to watch a group of giant spiders crossing the forest. Matching the description from their quest, the spiders loop around and start moving toward the group. The adventurers try to retreat quietly, but Yui steps on a branch, alerting the monsters, who immediately give chase. one of the spiders makes a huge leap, landing right in front of them, giving the other two time to surround the group. Quickly, everyone summons their weapons and tries to block the web attacks, but Silica gets her staff stuck to a tree. Before they know it, the whole battlefield is covered in silk. In desperation, Dagas asks what they should do, and Lloyd announces that he'll make their legs stop moving. Wielding his staff, the white mage conjures several magic circles and tells Yui to go on the offensive. As Dagas blocks another web shot, the swordswoman leaps over him and slashes through a wall of webs that was pinning the team down. With the way clear, Cross jumps into the tree where Silica's staff is stuck and manages to get her weapon back. Yui then raises her scabbard to shield herself from a spider's web shot, and using that opening she rushes in and slices the monster's legs. The second enemy steps up to face her but meets the same fate. Then, as the second spider fires its web, Yui uses the force to propel herself straight toward the third, gaining just enough momentum to cut off two of its legs in a single strike. Silica is able to jump into the fight at that moment, unleashing a flurry of fireballs. At the same time, Cross fires arrows through each one, triggering a fiery explosion as they hit the spider. With the battle won, Lloyd comes back to his senses and apologizes to the group for giving orders. But Dagas assures him it was actually a huge help. After all, the white mage has the talent and the knowledge for it. Yui says they'll be counting on him from now on. In other words, he's kind of become the unofficial leader of the party, and our protagonist is very happy with their trust. The next morning, the group breaks camp, with each member storing their own gear. As the others set off, Lloyd wonders why there were spiders, which he calls powlarks, in this area and where they might be headed. But before he can think too much, Yui calls out to him, and he hurries to rejoin the group. At night, when the team sets up camp, Lloyd can't stop thinking about the strange behavior of those creatures, thinking to himself that it looked like the entire pack was heading to the same place. At that moment, Yui comes over and interrupts the mage's thoughts to ask if he's going to take the night watch alone again. When he says yes, Silica chimes in, warning that he's going to ruin his health if he keeps this up night after night. However, Lloyd insists on standing guard so the others can save their strength. Besides, he was used to sleepless nights, and since he was still inexperienced, this was the only way he felt he could really help out. Yui starts to grumble that he's more important than he thinks, but Silica sees that our pro-tag won't budge and decides to let him do as he wishes, as long as he promises to speak up if things get tough. The next day, as the group continues their journey, the swordswoman keeps looking over at Lloyd for some reason. After a moment's rest, she realizes he can use a detection spell to sense enemies nearby and almost freaks out, since this is a pretty advanced magic. But our boy Lloyd, however, doesn't think much of it, since his spell couldn't even scan that large an area, but he admits that it's better than nothing. He then mentions that he planned to keep casting the spell at regular intervals to make sure the surroundings were safe. Yui worries that this routine might exhaust him, but he assures her he's fine. And well, with a hopeful look, she asks if there's any way she can help, but when he says no, she gets embarrassed and has to admit there's nothing more she can do. The scene then changes, and that night, while Lloyd was once again keeping watch by the campfire, the group's leader asks Silica if that guy simply doesn't trust the rest of the team. Sure, he was helpful and always willing, but he never seemed to rely on his companions for anything. Silica explains that everyone has their own pace and reminds her that she and Yui weren't that close at first either. The mage mentions that he probably has self-esteem issues, which makes it hard for him to connect with others, and that all he needs now is time and space. Yui, hearing this, comments that Lloyd is a real mystery. He didn't know much about ordinary things but seemed to know a lot about other stuff, and that just made her even more curious about what kind of life he'd led. As for that, Silica was certain Lloyd would share his story with them one day, as long as they didn't rush him. The warrior agrees but isn't entirely convinced, since someone as unusual as him could pull a rabbit out of a hat at any moment. And speaking of our pro-tag, the scene cuts over to him. Dagas comes over and asks the mage to take a walk with him. Lloyd says he can't leave his post, but Cross shows up and offers to take over. A few hours later, Dagas shows Lloyd a series of bells he'd strung throughout the forest, perfect for alerting them if a monster passed by. With that done, he tells Lloyd he can get some rest. but Mr. Stubborn refuses, feeling like he still had to stand guard. Dagas explains that's exactly what the team did before he joined them. In other words, they've survived without him before, so he really didn't need to worry. Lloyd still tries to argue that he wouldn't be able to use his detection magic if he fell asleep. So Dagas gets straight to the point, asking him point blank if he doesn't trust the team. Caught off guard, Lloyd insists it's just about being careful, not trust. But Dagas points out that Lloyd always takes on the job of detection and night watch alone, without including anyone else, and that made the others feel like he didn't trust them. That comment made Lloyd remember his old mentor, who'd always said how inexperienced he was, and Alan, who'd called him useless. With those words echoing in his mind, Lloyd stresses that he just doesn't want to be a burden to the team. Dagas replies that Lloyd should be a burden, because that's what teams are for, to make sure no one has to face every hardship alone. And that honestly, the team expects Lloyd to make mistakes, and if he does, his friend wants him to know that he can count on his friends. Embarrassed, Lloyd realizes he'd never even considered that, and Dagas even wonders where this guy came from. Our pro tag hesitates, asking if it's really okay for someone as weak as him to depend on others. But his colleague reassures him, saying that no one in the group thinks the support mage lacks talent. With that, he invites Lloyd to hit the hay. Before drifting off, Lloyd thinks about everything he'd heard and finds himself liking the idea of having friends who actually cared about him. At dawn, Yui stretches like a cat, until Lloyd comes over and, after a moment's hesitation, asks if she can help him fetch some water. Of course, she agrees, and the rest of the team watches the scene unfold, with smiles on their faces. The scene then changes, and elsewhere, inside a mansion, a hooded servant informs his master that he'll file his report once they finish placing the magic stones at the designated coordinates. The master replies that, with that done, the path is open. He asks about the high-level adventurers operating in Ishtar, and the servant says that the monsters they'd gathered have flooded the adventurers with requests, so most of them are out of the city right now. Those who stayed behind are all low-level, with the exception of the heroes' party. The boss wished he could get rid of that last group too, but unfortunately, the hero only acts at the kingdom's request. But either way, it would be interesting to see what this team can do alone in the eye of the storm. With that, the servant is instructed to notify the client that it's time, and takes his leave of Lord Michel. Back with the S-rank group, Yui starts to feel that something is off in the forest. The rest of the team agrees, especially when Cross points out that they haven't run into a single monster since entering this deep part. Yui asks if Lloyd did anything with his magic, but he says no, as he's been using his detection spell periodically, but that doesn't keep the monsters away. Speaking of which, he expands his search radius and spots a pack of monsters about 10 kilometers ahead. Checking the map, Cross realizes that direction puts them right near the farm where the group is headed. Yui raises an eyebrow. Didn't Lloyd say he couldn't scan that large an area? Lloyd admits that 10 kilometers doesn't feel like much to him. Silica points out that's just 10 times more than average. And even though the gang gets a little freaked out by the White Mage's power, the team tries to keep calm and focus on the situation, with Cross warning that her heart is gonna give out if she keeps being scared by this guy's power. And so, about 10 kilometers later, they arrive at the mission's farm. And from what they found, there's certainly a massive pack of dire wolves surrounding the place. But that's not what catches Lloyd's attention. According to him, what really stands out is the fact that this is the only spot his search magic is picking up any monsters. The question is, where did all the others go? Silica and the others agree it's seriously weird, as there should be plenty of other creatures as strong as these wolves in the area. Lloyd asks where the current owner of the farm is, and Yui says she heard he was injured by a wolf and is staying at his son's place in town. Suddenly, Cross points to something black and ominous in the middle of the farm, but no one else can see it, since his eyesight is way better than the rest of the group. Taking that into account, Lloyd casts a spell to enhance his own vision. And now he can see it. What's there is a magic stone radiating dark energy. He then uses the same spell on the others so they can see it too. And after a quick analysis, our protag starts to believe that the shadowy mist around the stone is beast folk mana. He remembers his mentor mentioning that there are beastmen capable of using a rare magic to command monsters, and it sure seems like this magic stone is behind what's happening. At that moment, Lloyd detects another wave of monsters heading their way, more than 1,000 creatures of all sorts. And that's when he's sure that everything is connected to that giant magic stone. He wonders if someone is trying to get rid of them but decides that would be way too indirect. If that were the case, Cross thinks they should fall back. But Yui refuses. If they retreat, the monsters will destroy every field in the area. The archer asks if she really plans to take on 1,000 monsters at once, and she falls silent. On the other hand, Dagas doubts they could even escape from so many enemies, and Silica adds that if the monsters chase them and there's a battle near town, the townspeople could be in serious danger. Finally, Lloyd decides the best move is to fight, and he's already got a plan. And the first step is to take care of that magic stone. He asks the archer if he can hit it from here. Cross figures he can but doubts he can destroy it. Lloyd says that's fine, as just hitting it will be enough. So, Cross readies his bow. At the same time, the support mage provides a boost to make up for the lack of firepower. And when the arrow flies with the added buff, we see that it was enough to shatter the magic stone. Impressed, Cross asks what Lloyd just did. He explains that he simply cast enhancement magic on the archer, the bow, and the arrows. Cross is in disbelief that the madman can buff people and weapons at the same time. And once again, Lloyd just thought that was standard procedure. Immediately, the group watches as the wolves revert to their natural ferocity after the stone shatters, turning on each other. Yui asks if Lloyd expected that. He says it was obvious that Thing was manipulating the beast's behavior. However, he'd also thought it was controlling the approaching horde. But apparently not, since that enormous mass of monsters is still closing in at full speed. And finally, the horde draws dangerously close to the 4 humans. Since the white mage claimed he could hold off the beasts, Yui says it's time to do something. But he replies that the timing still isn't right. The rest of the team starts to get seriously nervous, while the mage stays calm, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, when 3 wolves lunge at Silica, Lloyd tells her to react. And with that, shit's about to go down. She responds with a firestorm spell, and even she is impressed with the intensity of her magic, as she's never seen anything that powerful come from her staff before. Yui wants to know what kind of sorcery Lloyd used. He explains he just used magic power boost and mana cost reduction on her. The firestorm rages across the land, engulfing the horde in flames. But Lloyd tells Silica to cast it again, and then follow up with a wind spell. Cross realizes that the flames and the monsters will keep burning after the wind magic fans the fire, and plus, the smoke will make it harder for the flying monsters to see. Next, Lloyd initiates a telepathy spell with the archer to share the exact enemy positions he's detected. And with the locations clear in his mind, Cross is able to ignore the smoke and land pinpoint shots on the winged beasts swooping down from the sky, one after another. Up to this point, everything's going according to plan. But our boy Lloyd isn't one to leave things to chance, so he stays in command and tells Silica it's time for the final phase. But she warns that her mana is running on fumes. With that, he asks for her hand and performs a mana transfer. This left him stunned, as he gave her a lot of energy at once. But still, he told her to focus back on the fight. Silica raised her staff and cast Luvia, unleashing a powerful downpour that snuffed out the fire before it could spiral out of control, drenching the entire forest. After pulling off such a powerful spell, the mage was out of mana for good. She lost control of her body and simply collapsed. And before she could fall, Dagas appeared there to catch her. Yui assured her friend that they'd handle the rest. Silica, struggling to speak, told them not to push themselves too hard. The swordswoman couldn't help but laugh at the irony, hearing that from someone who had almost bit the dust from trying too hard. Leaving that aside, Yui pointed out that Lloyd had been brilliant for coming up with a plan like that. But, true to his rock-bottom self-esteem, Lloyd just shrugged it off and said he hadn't done anything special, just what any support should do. Seeing there was no changing this guy's mind, she gave up on the pep talk and drew her sword, ready to finish the job. Dagas hoisted his shield, moving to stand by her side. Meanwhile, Lloyd collapses on the grass, as he's feeling his strength fading. Frustrated that he's exhausted from just this, Lloyd thinks to himself that he has a long road ahead of him.
The scene changes and we move to a previously unknown location, where a beast woman lets out a terrified scream after being grabbed by a demon, while a beast man, who looks a lot like her, rushes to save her but can't reach the attacker. Frustrated, he unleashes a furious roar, vowing that the demon will pay for what he's done. The scene changes, and now, back with our group of heroes, we see that Lloyd, having recovered from his exhaustion, mentions that all signs point to them being deceived and that the person behind all this is targeting Ishtar. As they set out again, the white mage conjures several vials filled with a purple liquid, emphasizing that this mission was probably a trap from the start. He mentions that by sending high-level adventurers on previous missions, their enemies were actually drawing them away from Ishtar, weakening the city's defenses. Cross argues that the city still has the hero and the knights to protect it, but Dagus admits that Lloyd's deduction, at least to him, makes perfect sense. In any case, the archer reminds everyone that the magic stone they saw before was also strange, and the whole group agrees the city might be in danger and they need to head back. So Lloyd puts away the box of potions after downing one himself and casts a support spell on his allies. After that, he takes off at a colossal speed, and the gang is left wondering what the hell this madman is doing. However, when they try to run, they realize they're as light as feathers, and because of that, extremely fast. As they run, they end up catching up to our protag and ask what's going on. He replies that he cast a speed boost spell on everyone. Elsewhere, back at the secluded mansion, the demon who kidnapped the beast woman arrives. Lord Michel welcomes his esteemed client, but the visitor asks not to be called that. The host laughs and says that Great General Grist sounds way too formal anyway. Grist then warns that the vanguard is closing in on Ishtar and that their plan is working, all thanks to that woman. Speaking of which, he hopes she'll be useful in the future too. Michelle agrees she's a special one and that they stand to gain a lot by using her. Grist doesn't quite get what he means by that, but considering people once called him the Demon Lord's right-hand man, the least he can do is trust his talent. As for the rest, the man insists he can do anything as long as he's paid well for it. Meanwhile, the beast girl who was kidnapped is now locked up in a cell. Michelle appears with a box of potions, mentioning that it's time to borrow her power. After that, he uses a machine to manipulate a black magic stone and set his wicked plan in motion. Back in the forest, we see that Lloyd and his friends are going hard on the marathon towards Ishtar. After a long run, they stop to catch their breath. Lloyd summons the same box of purple potions and hands one to each of them. Silica worries the mage will run out of mana if he keeps buffing everyone all the way to Ishtar, but he reassures her, saying he's gotten so much practice that he barely uses any magical energy. Impressed, she asks if he's done this many times before, and he just shrugs, saying it's something you get used to. He explains that a long time ago, his master dumped him in a forest far from civilization and made him find his way home alone as training. For a white mage, fighting monsters alone is nearly impossible, meaning running away was all he could do. To survive, he had to use every type of enhancement magic he knew, pointing out that he lived through a true hell during that process. Yui comments that he really went through the ringer as a kid, but our protag just considers himself inexperienced and firmly states that it was a normal form of training. Yui and Silico obviously disagree, insisting that Lloyd's training was neither normal nor healthy. This makes him think that maybe, just maybe, he hasn't trained enough. After all, he's traveling with a team of S-rank adventurers, while he's nowhere near that level, and he feels he needs to work even harder to catch up. The girls sigh, lamenting that the guy has a screw loose, but decide to follow the doctor's advice and just let the crazy guy be. Finally, Dagus calls everyone back to the road, and the white mage does what he does best, which is layering enhancement spells, which ends up triggering a detection spell to sense possible enemies nearby. Hours later, they've already made their way through the thick forest and are closing in on Ishtar. The girls in the group praise how fast they've been able to travel without ever losing their breath, until Lloyd, without warning, slams on the brakes, causing a pileup with all of his teammates. After rolling to a very undignified stop, Dagus demands to know why he stopped so suddenly. He explains that his detection spell picked up something, and although he has no idea what it is, the feeling is so ominous that he has a terrible sense of foreboding. He asks the others to continue on to Ishtar, while he checks out the situation himself. Yui offers to go with him, since this could turn into a real fight and a white mage shouldn't go in alone. The rest of the team quickly insists on joining too, as no one wants to leave their friend to face the unknown by himself. In another scene change, we see 4 individuals in black robes gather around a magical artifact to demonstrate their power once again. We return once more to the protagonist group. As night falls, Lloyd and his companions reach a cabin. He can sense demons nearby along with someone of a different race. Yui, worried, asks if he means demons from the Magocracy, which he confirms. Before they left, Dagus had mentioned that beyond those mountains lay the nation of demons, and that race has been hiding out lately, but could emerge at any moment to try and conquer the continent. Lloyd remembers that demons are strictly forbidden from entering the 3 main nations, and the Magocracy isn't exactly known for respecting rules. Yui then asks if he has any memories of the Magocracy from when he was younger, but he says he remembers nothing from his childhood, and that the war was already over by the time he went to live with his mentor. Silica realizes the mage is a war orphan, while Yui apologizes for suggesting that Lloyd didn't care. Cross suggests that they should report this to the knights when they get back to town, but the mage wants to gather more information before leaving. Even though it's dangerous, Lloyd can sense the same mana from the magic stone, and Dagus thinks it might be related to those monsters that attacked the farm. Lloyd agrees, adding that Ishtar is their real target, then it's worth the risk to investigate further. With everyone on board, the group approaches the cabin. Cross peers through the window, but it seems empty. With that, Lloyd casts his detection spell again and senses the enemy presence underground. He asks Silica to use her earth magic and give the team a buff. Silica conjures the sandbox and collapses the roof right on top of the hooded figures gathered below. Yui wastes no time. She bursts in and takes down the first man. She demands to know who they are and what they're doing. But one of the men reacts, lifting the fallen stones with magic and hurling them at her. She's quick, deflecting the rocks with her sword. Cross fires an arrow, hitting the attacker just as his ally tries to escape. Lloyd buffs Silica, who casts the sandbox again to keep up the offensive. Another enemy retaliates with more levitation magic. Dagus jumps in to shield everyone with his shield. Seeing that their attacks aren't working, the hooded figures start to panic and flee. Yui chases after one of the escapees, only to run right into an ambush, but Cross covers her with his bow, taking down 2 more enemies before they can harm her. Now only one remains. The last one runs over to the beast woman prisoner and casts a spell that wraps her in a sort of cocoon, starting to levitate her out of there. But the adventurers rush in to set things right. The man dashes up the stairs, and Lloyd tells Yui to circle around and intercept him. He senses a powerful magical signature coming from inside the cocoon. Before long, Yui and the group's archer manage to corner the fugitive. But he doesn't surrender. He unleashes a flurry of lightning bolts. Lloyd throws up magical shields to protect everyone, until finally one of the bolts hits the caster himself, knocking him out. With the threat neutralized, Lloyd dispels the cocoon and discovers the prisoner is a beast woman. The adventurers quickly bring her inside the cabin. Silica guesses she must be from the Forest Empire. Believing she can shed some light on what's happening, they ask Lloyd to try and revive her. The mage casts an exceptionally powerful healing spell, the same one Yui saw cure Sylvie. On top of that, our protag says he's improved the spell since then. And Yui is obviously shocked, as she had no idea that adventurers could actually improve magic like that, leaving Lloyd baffled by her reaction. Silica, equally surprised, agrees that being able to alter a spell is incredible. He explains that his master used to force him to help with things like that. He remembers all too well. Every 5 minutes, she'd come up with a new thing, asking for help with her spells to stop aging, cure baldness, or other things. Day after day, Lloyd is more convinced that his master is completely eccentric. Yui, on the other hand, thinks that word is too mild to describe what that woman is really like, but lets it go, because at that moment the spell takes effect and the sleeping beast woman starts to wake up. Yui, barely able to contain her excitement, starts to practically interview the girl. Eventually, she reveals her name is Kureha. The human asks why she was held captive by those bastards, but the beast woman seems too frightened to answer. Seeing this, Lloyd explains that they're adventurers, sent on a mission, and that he sensed the mana of someone from the beast folk. From what he's heard, some beast folk can control monsters through magic, and maybe, just maybe, Kureha was responsible for what happened at the farm. Hearing this, she confesses that it was her spell that caused the whole mess. Meanwhile, in the forest, 2 Ishtar scouts stumble upon a gigantic magic stone and realize that a huge number of creatures are lurking, guarding the object. With no hope of fighting, they turn to flee, only for one to be taken down instantly by vicious wolves. Parallel to this, an army of creatures begins to march through the forest toward the city. Back at the cabin, the adventurers are shocked to learn there really is a spell capable of controlling monsters. Kureha confirms the demons forced her to use that power, turning it into a weapon, which all but confirms that the Magocracy is behind the attack on Ishtar. And the big issue now is that if the demons' plan was to leave the city's defenses open, Ishtar might already be in danger.
Given the circumstances, the group rushes back toward Ishtar, with Kureha joining them. Lloyd feels bad for dragging her into all this, but she admits she'd be in even bigger trouble if they left her behind. After running for some time, they stopped for a quick break, and everyone is anxious to reach the city. Lloyd uses his detection magic and senses a horde of monsters heading for the city. However, that's not all, as there's an army coming right behind them. Yui turns to the mage and asks what they should do next. In response, he asks to borrow Kureha's power. At the same time, he tells the others to warn the city about the imminent danger. Yui threatens to protest, but Lloyd points out that no one can handle 2 things at once, and reassures her that everything will work out as long as they work together. Bolstered by his words, the group quickly grasps the seriousness of the situation. He then casts an enhancement spell to make the allies' perilous journey a little easier. And with that, Yui, Dagus, Cross, and Silica set out for Ishtar, while our protag and Kureha leave to follow their own mission.
So let's head over to the Disgusting Heroes group, and we see that he was pissed because, according to him, all the candidates for recruitment were terrible. In his opinion, the guys were more useless than that piece of trash Lloyd, especially since none of them even used storage magic, while Mia mentioned their limit was just 2 enhancement spells at a time. The rest of the group started to wonder if maybe Lloyd was, in fact, exceptional, and that the leader had simply never noticed. And even with all the facts and the truth staring him in the face, the imbecile Alan simply insisted that it was impossible, because Lloyd was worthless. And if things weren't going so well, the tendency was for them to get worse. At that moment, a royal knight entered the office to bring news from a patrol in the forest. A horde of over 10,000 monsters was advancing toward Ishtar, and the army needed the adventurer group to help form the defensive lines. Hearing this, Alan saw a golden opportunity to make a name for himself. He ordered word to be sent to the troops that they would be ready for battle soon, especially since it was a royal request, mentioning that now he could finally prove he was the most powerful warrior in the kingdom. The scene changes, and not far away, we see that Lloyd and Kureha were already keeping an eye on the horde. He mentions that if a horde of this size joined the main force, Ishtar would be wiped off the map. With that in mind, he concludes that splitting up was the best decision. With the scenario set, the objective was simple: find a way to defeat these enemies. Kureha, however, wanted to know if there was a way to do this without spilling blood, since these monsters were just being controlled and not acting on their own. And since they were being controlled using her power, she ends up feeling guilty. Seeing her concern, Lloyd promised to find a way to avoid hurting them as much as possible. After all, he's a pacifist and agrees that it's always better to solve things without unnecessary violence. With that in mind, he asked if it was possible for Kureha to use her magic to send the monsters back home, but she explained that it probably wasn't, as there were too many of them. In that case, the mage suggested amplifying her magic to try anyway, and even though she thought it was impossible, she still agreed to give it a shot. The support mage began to prepare his buff to increase her power, but her spell ended up being blocked. That's when she realized something in the forest was interfering. The scene changes, and back at the guild, we see that Alan was gathered with the other warriors who would join the kingdom's battle force. As usual, he was acting arrogant, belittling everyone else's skills as if he were on another level, especially since all the rank A and higher adventurers were out of town, leaving only rank B and below. Hearing the provocations from the most imbecilic hero that could possibly exist, several adventurers were already boiling with rage, but the wimp over there obviously just shrugged it off and mentioned that maybe they'd just serve as meat shields. At that moment, the guild branch director arrived to cool everyone's jets, reminding them that the real enemies were the monsters and there was no time for infighting. Not wanting to lose the spotlight, Alan raised his voice and presented his brilliant battle plan. First, each mage would unleash their most powerful spells, with each one taking down about 10 monsters, allowing the infantry to advance and buy more time. Then the mages would fire another round, and so on. At that, one of the mages raised her hand and admitted she couldn't cast anything that strong. Another said he could take down maybe one enemy at a time tops. Alan exploded at these statements, claiming that everyone there should be able to do more. However, even his own teammate Mia confessed she wasn't feeling very confident, as her spells had gotten weaker and she couldn't cast them the same way anymore. This only made Alan even more pissed. He demanded to know why she hadn't mentioned something so important earlier, and she explained that she wasn't the only one, saying that Lulu, Sheena, and even Lena had all been weaker since Lloyd left the group. Alan felt deceived by all of them, but Lena pointed out that it was his fault for being an imbecile and not paying attention, mentioning that he had become so sure of himself that he simply ignored the warnings they had been trying to give for a long time. In fact, she added that because of that, she didn't even think he was qualified to call himself a hero. Fuming at her words, Alan tried to throw a punch at her, but she blocked it with ease. Under the weight of everyone's judgmental stares, the imbecile hero completely lost it and stormed out of the guild, stomping his feet. His teammates ran after him, with the exception of Lena. The remaining adventurers quickly realized that this so-called hero was nothing like the rumors claimed, and morale dropped drastically. Noticing this, Lena decided to take responsibility, assuring the adventurers that she would leave the heroes group, cut ties with him, and join the others on the front lines. Furthermore, she suggested they bring in a certain mage named Lloyd. And speaking of the guy, the scene changes, and we see that he had just discovered the source of the problem controlling the hordes, a huge magic stone, almost identical to the one from the farm. Kurahea noted that it was imbued with a dark power that interfered with her spells, and that there were probably several scattered around. In other words, if they wanted to regain control, they'd have to deal with all of them. She could sense the magic stones if she got close enough, but in such a vast area, that was difficult. Hearing this, our boy Lloyd combined telepathy with a search spell to extend her senses. On top of that, with a concealment spell, he could get her close to the stones without the monsters noticing, though the spell would break if they took a heavy hit. With this plan, they approached the first magic stone and managed to neutralize its power. Now it was time to go for the next one. The scene changed once more, and meanwhile, the defenses of Ishtar are preparing for the arrival of the enemy horde. While one of the soldiers wonders if this is really the right thing to do, the guild branch director understands his concern. After all, the lives of every single fighter there depended on one man. Hours earlier back at the guild, Lena had explained that Lloyd, the white mage, was the true pillar of the heroes party, not the figures the public knows best. She recognizes that everyone was so blinded by the glorification of the hero that they completely overlooked the person who actually made things happen. The director asked if Lloyd was really responsible for the brilliant way the strongest adventurer group fought, and the warrior confirmed it without hesitation. Moreover, she assured him that this war could only be won with his help. The problem was, she had no idea where he was. Since the director tracked all registered adventurers, he explained that Lloyd had gone on a mission with a rank S group, and the trip alone would take several days. Even so, Lena believed he could arrive much sooner using some kind of travel magic, unless he was tied up with that mission at the moment. Either way, she hoped everyone would trust that the mage was doing exactly what needed to be done right now. Back in the present, the director explained that everyone had agreed to Lena's proposal, but doubt still lingered. After all, everyone wanted to protect their families, their friends, and everyone they loved. Finally, the horde arrived, and Lena ordered the archers to fire their arrows. Their shots took down part of the monster's front line, and then the shield-bearers shouted for the advancing enemies to be pushed into the trench. While the mages launched fireballs towards the swarm, waves of water followed, flooding the trenches to drown the creatures and widen the pit, making it even harder for the enemy to cross. The plan was simple: hold out until the rank S adventurers returned. Only then would they have a real chance. And speaking of them, Yui and her companions were advancing toward Ishtar. Boosted by Lloyd's support magic, which kept everyone from getting exhausted along the way, the mere presence of the white mage was enough to inspire them to give their all. Even at night, they refused to rest. Every minute lost was a minute the city was being brutally attacked. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Kurahaya finally reached the last magic stone, guarded by high-rank wolves and blood panthers. When she deactivated the stone, the savage look vanished from the creature's eyes, but this only revealed another problem, as wolves and panthers were natural enemies, and now the two species were attacking each other. When the first two clashed, they knocked over the magic stone, and in that instant, Kurahaya lost her invisibility. Every beast in sight turned their snarling gazes toward her, and to save her ally, Lloyd cast a spell to draw all their attention to himself. We cut back to Ishtar, and we see that the situation there is starting to get complicated as some monsters manage to jump over the trench and reach the shield bearers, who raise their shields to block the attack and push them back. On the front line, with her guard up and leading the tanks, Lena was informed that the right flank had suffered severe damage, and as if that wasn't enough, the defensive line broke, allowing the monsters to wreak havoc. But at that critical moment, a light at the end of the tunnel appeared as the Rank S adventurers arrived. Elsewhere, Lloyd kept the enemies busy with his physical enhancement spells, and although this didn't mean he could take them all on at once, Kurahaya knew that he was only able to avoid the monsters with great skill, not defeat them. Even so, despite not being able to fight head-on, that human was doing everything in his power to protect her. And seeing that the situation was starting to get critical for our protagonist, she then began to sing. Her voice caused an aura to emanate from her body, while the sung melody caught the attention of all the nearby monsters. Reaching out to them, she slowly convinced them to retreat. When Lloyd ran over to ask what she had done, she explained that she had simply convinced them to return to the forest, mentioning that her spell didn't control them, but only allowed her to share her thoughts with them. Lloyd thanked her for saving him, and she returned the sentiment because at the end of the day, they had each risked themselves for the other. With that settled, they needed to head to Ishtar immediately. We return then to the city where all hell was breaking loose, and the Rank S adventurers were giving everything they had to help out. However, the sheer number of enemies soon began to overwhelm them, and the front line started to crumble. The archers were running out of arrows, the mages were almost out of mana, and still, Lena stood out as the most inspirational figure on the field, being the pillar that held the front line together, making everyone believe that if they could just hold on, victory would come. But you don't win a battle on determination alone, and we see that warriors were falling in droves, the defenses were crumbling, and everything indicated that things had gone south. However, against all odds, we see that Kurahaya appeared there and began to sing her song. Her beautiful voice echoed through the chaos, calming the savage eyes of the creatures that were attacking so fiercely. And then, as if it were a true miracle, the monsters turned around and simply began to walk away slowly, while Yui's group spotted Lloyd and exploded in relief. Seeing how exhausted Kurahaya was from so much singing, the white mage held her by the shoulders to make sure she was okay. He was jaw-dropped by her ability, just as she was by his support magic. After all, she could never have cast her spell across such a vast battlefield without him.
She asks what kind of help he provided, and our OP protag then explains that he cast several layers of mana consumption reduction and magical power boost. Even so, no matter how much he contributed, the mage knows it was the girl who did most of the work, and he makes sure to point that out. With that, she reveals that her real name is Claire. But just when we think we're getting a happy ending before the moment can be digested, we see that some stone giants arrive at the walls of Ishtar, making it clear that the war is far from over. And with that, the episode ends. So, what did you guys think of this battle and the twist at the end? How do you think our protag and his friends will solve this situation? If you want the continuation, let me know in the comments that you want the next part, smash that like button and the hype to support this video, and subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next parts.